Recording. Thank you all
Right.
for doing that and getting it out to the wider world.
My pleasure.
I don't think you've met Marty before, but I know Janet has, Matt has, Elizabeth has, Dan has had the intro. We look to, I think we have Ken Madsen.
I am here.
Wonderful. And I'll let some others tune in as we go. So 30-second countdown and we will get going.
Love it.
Once again, we have multiple jurisdictions represented: Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, Texas, and New York State. Downtown Manhattan.
Upper West Side.
Or yeah, Upper West Side. Pardon me.
When you're talking about Dan was talking about the experiences in Texas. I had to get my car out of the garage. A guy was in a hazmat suit. I mean, it's crazy.
Really? Wow.
I spoke with Ken this morning, and he has invited the Frontrunner team onto his beautiful water vessel this summer, or should we ever be able to travel across the border again. Got some nice intel there.
and Ken, just to be clear, that's not a normal experience when people are getting your car because of just you?
Okay.
Well, good morning, all. We'll get going. I know Marty is going from conflict to conflict, so I appreciate your time, Marty Seymour. I'd like to introduce you to my great friend. I know he's a friend to many of us on our team, and today's luminary, Marty Seymour. Starting on a personal note, Marty is on what we call our personal board of directors. There's a group out of Saskatchewan who has regular phone calls, and really we can talk about anything. So at once he's been my confidant, he's an advisor, he's also sort of my largest critic, and he's not afraid to say that. He's introduced me to the topic of limit testing. And what that's is just going beyond the comfort zone or the status quo to really let us know that there's a real world on the other side of this and what we're typically used to. And Marty from day one has been Frontrunner's greatest champion. Side note that he was on site for our very first installation in Regina, Saskatchewan. He did a great video on that. I remember, Marty, you posting it to your Twitter feed. We know that you have a big following, and I was amazed by the uptake. And it was really with that first tweet where the public actually saw it as a social setting, Frontrunner, that is like, you know what? I think we're onto something. So really thank you for that. But that's not the reason why you're here. You're here because of the job that you actually make money doing. Marty's bio reads that he's the Director of Industry Relations for Farm Credit Canada, and where he engages national associations, government officials, and industry influencers to explore partnership opportunities that add value to Canadian agriculture. Marty has a ton of accolades that I'm not going to get into. His bio is really just an official way of saying that he has one of the coolest jobs in the country. He tours the country, he gets to speak to farmers, students, he gets to explore tech and innovation. Sort of every day is sort of a new exploration. But all of this said, one of Marty's main areas of coverage is food and food safety. We know that it's been a topic within public consciousness. And given our current sort of pandemic state, that's where most of our minds immediately went. It's like, how am I going to get to the grocery store? How am I going to get food into my fridge to protect, my safety? So there's a true psychology behind food. This morning's news headlines, I think, really speak to its importance. McDonald's Canada is actually starting to import beef because of shortages. The main article in CNN is the order from Trump to go back to work. And Elizabeth, I know meat is trending very well. There's a surging stock there in response to this, and there's some major changes, as we know, in terms of that, veganism and vegetarianism. So all this said, food for obvious reasons is really important. It's front and center, and Marty is here to tell us why.
All right. Good morning, everyone. This is super fun for me. I've got to watch your company grow over the years, and I think what you're doing here with these weekly calls is really clever. One of my mentors in Regina sits on a group of a very eclectic people, and they've been getting together weekly to talk about the impact of COVID. And it strikes me one of the biggest opportunities that I think business people miss is the idea to learn from other sectors. And so I'm proud to be here this morning, and mostly because I know I'll learn something from you guys, but I hope that I can introduce you to what's going on in the world of food, as I would see it, traveling the Canadian landscape. I work for the largest agriculture lender in Canada, so we tend to look at it from a financing standpoint. But as Nathan said, I've got the coolest job in the industry. Is I really get to meet every sector, from greenhouses to cows to canola to food processing and food retail. And my job is to try to piece it together and make some sense and figure out what the future looks like. And I would admit that right now in this COVID world is I don't know what the future looks like. So a lot of the conversations are more about driving deeper thought about what's the food system going to look like. And so to maybe level set, I always think about what keeps me up at night. What am I watching right now? Right now, we're in major planting mode in Canadian agriculture. So same in the US. Everyone's going to the field to get corn and soybean and canola grown, but that's not where the pressure is in the food system right now. The pressure is more on the vegetable side. And in Canada in particular, we have about 60,000 temporary foreign workers that fly in from Guatemala, Mexico, Central America, and they come here every spring, and they've been coming for 20 years to help farmers get high value produce seeded. So that might be onions, carrots, pick something you'd see in the produce aisle of the grocery store. When COVID hit, we locked down all the international flights. And then we said, if you come to Canada, you have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. So from an agriculture perspective, the industry is powered by people that come in from another country to seed these crops and harvest these crops. So right now, I think we have about 11,000 foreign workers that came into Canada in April, and they're mostly in BC, Ontario, and in the Maritimes, where we'd have these more high value produce crops. So we had about 11,000 come in last year. At this time, we have about 13. But we've got a long way to go to make sure that we're resourced up. And so I'm watching the horticulture industry really close to just see how many acres we get seeded, and does it put pressure on food supply? For me, it's still too early to really tell the impact, but it's an area to watch. As Nathan opened, talking about McDonald's and the beef, the packing industry is the other one. And early on when COVID hit, I was pretty confident and comfortable that the food system was going to be stable and secure. But the wild card was always, would people come to work? And so if you have the fear of coming in to work in a slaughter plant, even if you're not sick, but your neighbor might be sick, that's a different dynamic. That's the social cost of COVID, not the economic impact. So we see in Canada, the Cargill plant south of Calgary kills 55% of our beef. They're on temporary shutdown, and McDonald's is one of their exclusive providers of ground beef. And McDonald's made a statement yesterday that they're going to have to go outside of Canada for the first time. And I'll say it's 4 years since they've been 100% Canadian beef. And I think McDonald's is really humbled to say, man, we love the Canadian beef system and the brand, but in the spirit of risk management, we're going to have to go outside. And so that'll be US. I mean, what a lot of people don't appreciate about the food system is the US-Canadian pork, beef, really integrated. So the packing plant and the movement of animals back and forth is really in sync. And so there's certainly room for concern, and we'll likely see some prices start to move up on this, but it's all happening so fast, it's super hard to forecast. And then the last area for me is ethanol. And why ethanol? Southern Ontario, where we see lots of ethanol plants in the Midwest, it really opens the door for me about the integration of the food system. So in the ethanol industry, we grow corn to have ethanol blended fuel. But in Ontario right now, gasoline consumption is down 40%. People just aren't driving. So that means there's no home for ethanol, which means all of that corn that our customers, farmers grow, the price of corn needs to go down in order to create some balance. But the piece you also miss out on is the byproduct of ethanol is distiller's grain. And distiller's grain feeds dairy cows and pigs and beef cows. And so the integration of the food system, the biodiversity that we have in food, to me is somewhat fragile, and you can draw it all the way back to oil and the fact that we're just not burning gasoline. And a lot of people don't see that connection from a day-to-day basis. Now, something a little more relatable probably to people on the call is the impact on restaurants. So for me, the commodities are foods that have probably seen the biggest impact bacon, French fries, milk, and I think craft beer. So bacon, most of the bacon soon gets put on bacon cheeseburgers and pushed out through restaurants. That industry used to package 15-kilo boxes of bacon and ship it through the food system and go to restaurants. But none of us in our house are buying 15 kilos of bacon or pounds of bacon at a time. So they're having trouble in a modern packing plant retooling the bacon packages to fit the grocery store market. So there's a bit of a glut of bacon on the market. French fries, we're consuming those in restaurants, and that's just not happening. So farmers are having to destroy good potatoes right now, and that's heartbreaking for the industry. We've read about dumping milk. The milk, what happened in milk was we stopped going to schools and having milk programs. All that creamer they used at Starbucks, even restaurants cooking with cream, there's no home for that. Cheese. So that industry is having to retool. So the event of the massive shift to moving home, 40% of Canadians eat out every week. It's close to 50% in the US. The food system was designed, it was in balance to support restaurant. Now all of a sudden in a 2-week period, we had to totally retool. So we're seeing on the lending side, we're seeing companies strapped for working capital. And there's two sides of it in the food business. There's working capital for those that have opportunity and they need to tool up, they need to get more packaging, add another line because demand for their products going through the roof. And then there's those that were selling, think about the maple syrup industry, an iconic Canadian brand. A lot of maple syrup was sold in agritourism. All of a sudden, there's going to be no tourism industry early summer. So how do the maple syrup manufacturers manage this time? So you see pressure on working capital because of that. Some winners, certainly some losers. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we're seeing is a shift in people buying whole foods at the grocery store. So I probably didn't anticipate that, but we're cooking at home now and we're buying eggs, produce, and meat. We're not buying the prepackaged, ready to go on the move type food that we all were using while we were racing from meeting to meeting and flying from airport to airport. So, bread maker purchases are up 600% since we've come home, locked down. You can't get yeast. Robinhood has moved from their iconic yellow packaging of flour to a generic bag so they can keep up with demand. And so those things are kind of interesting from a food shift and food trend standpoint. Maybe the last one before we get into questions is, the other one that I've been watching is pre-COVID, there was we had a lot of ambition around trying to minimize single-use plastics in society. And COVID has highlighted what I've often said is not a binary argument. You can't have life without plastics, without some compromises. So now we're in a mode where when you go to the grocery store and pick up a green pepper, you're having worries. Is it infected with somebody else who had touched it previous to you? And so we're going to move back into an era where we're going to start to package our foods more thoroughly from a food safety standpoint. There is no demonstrated food safety risk with COVID, but it's the thought. Additionally, food waste. The plastics are a big part of a food waste strategy for the industry. So if you go to Costco, you'll notice everything that comes off the shelf in Costco is prepackaged in plastic. It minimizes waste. And I think it also deals with this other concern we have now about other people touching your food. So there's lots of moving parts in this. I still believe that the food system is strong, but I think I would admittedly say there's some fragility in it in terms of what's the produce situation look like if we don't get the crop seeded, what happens if a packing plant's suddenly closed. But if you looked at the pasta in the store and the cereal on the shelves, this system's very robust, and there is inventory. The people where there's no beef, it's more of a supply chain issue than that there's no cows. The cows are still here. Cows are still on the ground. There just might be a delay in when those cows get harvested, is the word we use. So I'm going to turn it over to questions, kind of what's top of mind, and I certainly. Food conversation, everyone has an opinion of it. I mean, this is agriculture's day to shine, is finally people are asking questions about food and they're curious. And this industry standing here firm saying, we'll make sure that there's food on your shelves. Might not be easy, but we're going to work hard.
Janet.
I turn myself off. So Marty, there's been a lot of talk globally about making supply chains local again. And we understand why when we look at PPE and other types of medical products. But when we take a look at our food supply chain and some of the actions unrelated to food, which we saw from the US, do you see Canada doubling down on things like its corridor supply management of eggs and beef and milk? And or do you still see that slowly going the way of the dodo bird?
Yeah, that's a good question, Janet. I probably would answer the question this way is, will governments double down like food sovereignty? I was just having this conversation this morning with somebody else that's a thought partner, and this is just the world according to me, but I think food sovereignty is new idea to Western culture. Europeans have been talking sovereignty since the Second World War. Asians in the Middle East have all been gearing up and creating plans. The entire Belt and Road Initiative out of China is geared around making sure we have food sovereignty for China. So to me, I think what you're going to see in Canada, this isn't a conversation about supply management, I don't think, Janet. I don't think that's where the country's going. I think it's more about what's the role of government in how big companies should be, so that we don't end up with in the beef industry, we have two major packers that drive the beef supply, and we didn't get here by accident. That was how the capitalist market played out for the sector. So probably the role of government moving forward is more of a conversation of what's the catalyst they can be to create new investment to create diversity in the food system, so that we have more choice to process food. So you take packing plants, should we have more boutique packing plants? Absolutely. Why don't we? Because the industry is built around a just-in-time delivery model that was structured to be efficient. You and I sitting at home wanted safe, affordable food. And I tell you, I have a lot of confidence in the food system that we have from a safety standpoint in this country, even though we have a couple big packers that sometimes get a black eye. If I was really honest, I love the food safety system here. We never have a doubt about food safety. So I think what you're going to see, I've seen some conversations out of Quebec already that said, hey, we've got to work on food sovereignty, and could we be a catalyst as a government to get greenhouses built in this country and more packing plants, et cetera. But I think it's going to take a while. The private sector has to see a business opportunity in this versus a public good.
It'll be an interesting one. Thank you for your insights. And by the way, I think the supply chain's held up very, very well in the context of the shift, and you can still go to a grocery store and find food. So I think overall, the system's held up exceedingly well.
Marty, I have a bit of a front runner specific question. Obviously, we play in the public space. There's a lot of restaurants out there, and Ken, who's on the call, forwarded me an article yesterday that basically spoke to the fact that the restaurant industry is forever changed. The idea of social distancing and sitting in a restaurant in a filled environment simply don't work anymore. So do you have any sort of thoughts on what the future of restaurants could look like, and whether it's a hybrid scenario, and really what you're thinking there?
Yeah, I have lots of opinions on this, and it truly is that, Nathan. So right now, I was quite worried that the quick service industry, so that's your McDonald's, your Burger King, I was worried for those guys. I thought, wow, they're not doing well. What I learned this week is 70% of their business pre-COVID was drive-through. So the impact of COVID on their business, although significant, I mean, they are seeing less visits, didn't cut as deep for them. But the independent mom and pop shop that's operating a restaurant in every downtown in this country is more than strained. The average margin, according to Restaurants Canada, on a restaurant is 4 to 6%. So as much as everyone thinks that the restaurant business is lucrative, it's a lean business. So if you ran 2 or 3 months with no revenue and a rent payment, and then the opening, as we phase in new visitors at restaurants, you can only operate at 50% capacity. I don't know how you could operate a modern restaurant with that low of space utilization. Like, it's a whole space conversation. Mm-hmm. So I worry for them, and so maybe there's a rationalization of the number of restaurants we have. But where I'm a contrarian on this one is I've come to learn that we are truly social creatures. Even introverts are social creatures. I had takeout last night from a major Canadian brand, which is one of my favorites, and I didn't like it. And I was sitting there with my friend having this dinner, and I said the food was fine, but the experience wasn't. You know, it showed up in a box, and like I didn't get the fancy plate, and that like. So I think there's a place for the restaurant of the future. I think we've all been introduced to online ordering, and we're open to these things. That's the event that's helped the industry say they can diversify. I mean, Cactus, you know, it's a great Canadian brand out of Vancouver. Talked to me a year ago about the amount of the kitchens that were built in a modern restaurant were just to serve patrons. The kitchens of the future will serve patrons and takeout. So nothing drives innovation like a crisis. And so Nathan, I think we'll see less restaurants in the short term, but I just can't imagine a society that evolved to 40% of our meals eaten out of the house is going to go to 10% of the meals eaten out of the house. It just doesn't compute for me.
Sure. Well, thank you. Open it up to anyone else. Any questions?
Yeah, Marty, this is Dan. I have a question relative. It's actually two questions, so I'll ask the first one. You kind of have this dichotomy that's going on right now, trends that were already taking place about almost like farm to table, that was already going on, that this might accelerate, in terms of the supply chain issues. And you also have kind of this, ag tech that's going on about trying to drive as much efficiency out of every square acre that can be garnered, and almost fueling this just-in-time kind of phenomenon that has kept prices, consumer prices, so down. Where do you see those trends, continue after COVID?
Yeah, that's a really insightful question, Dan. So the last numbers I saw to the US was, I think it was 6.7% of your income is spent on food. Canada, it's closer to 9%. You get to Europe, you get in the upper teens. And then if you get in developing nations like Africa, it's like 40%. So I try to overlay that with the idea of the need for cheap food, because I think ultimately all of us want high quality, safe, affordable food. And so when I look at tech, there is certainly a place for the buy local, and I'm a huge fan of the concept because it's a margin opportunity in the system, and it's a story behind our food. Like, I think that's a marketable play. But if you look at the average consumer, where they shop and where they go, second to taste, price is the number one driver on what I buy. So for probably many of us on the call, we're probably not living month to month on our paycheck, where we can pay a premium for foods that hit at one of our values. But if you look at the average person that is running with 170% consumer debt and already feels that their food budget is strained, I don't know if there's room for food to increase 30% in cost in order to deal with buy local play. But for those that want it, hey, I'm all for that. So if I look at tech and I overlay the technology play, it's really an efficiency move. And our company plays on the ag tech side too. And I think the real opportunity right now in agriculture tech is on data. The second to healthcare, I think the food system is the biggest repository of data. We're every acre of land is collecting some form of data. And so what we don't have right now is a comprehensive data management system to drive out food waste, to make sure that we're getting food where it needs to be in time. That to me is the real opportunity in this space. And so hopefully somebody's listening to this call can crack this nut of the integration of all of the data from the railroad industry that Janet would know, right through to the farmers seeding the corn. I have an ambition that somebody in Asia would lift a jug of Canadian canola oil off the shelf, and it would trigger an order that comes all the way back to our farm to tell us how much canola to seed. So the system becomes more integrated and efficient. So I still see the food system being hugely driven by efficiency. And it's because the average consumer doesn't have the disposable income to double what they want to spend on food.
Right. The second question I had for you is, I 100% agree with you in terms of restaurants, and we are social creatures, and we will get back to some normalcy. There's going to be a lot of bleeding and the thinning of the herds relative to that, short term for sure. But the world has certainly changed when you start thinking about some of the moves that some of the bigger guys were making in regards to things like in-app ordering and some of the contactless, ecosystems that, are there. And you look at some of the even more chain restaurants that were doing more of the table side, payments and things like that. Where do you see that from like a restaurant perspective of this world of kind of the large corporations that were moving on that and some of the smaller ones that were always laggards in that, and kind of this move post-COVID? Do you see that changing greatly?
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't know if I truly understand that. I'd welcome someone else on the call to weigh in with an opinion too. I tell you, from a grocery standpoint, I'm not going to totally answer your question. I may take it an area that I have a little bit more experience in. So grocery in Canada was really lagging on online shopping. And so 3 years ago, when this started to kick in, both Save-On, both the Safeway brands, Sobeys brands, right, said they expected 22 to 25% of grocery purchases to be online. So let's say that's 2016, they made this statement. By 2018, they were barely hitting 10%. They were having a lot of trouble getting there. COVID is the catalyst that says, wow, that experience isn't so bad. I think I'm a huge fan of the customer and the visitor experience. And this is why I'm a huge fan of what FrontRunner does, is I look at the engagement of the technology to say, you're playing to my emotions. So if I look at, I can't necessarily answer your restaurant experience from the visitor experience and the pay, et cetera, but I can tell you in grocery, if we can figure out how to make the checkout experience less irritating, grocery has a future. Because it's the checkout is where the bottleneck of annoyance happens. I went to all this work to pick my stuff up, and we know some companies. We got Walmart and Amazon have both played around with that. That's the next generation of thinking, is just make the checkout experience less of an irritation. It's a bottleneck of infection if you look at it from a COVID standpoint. So online solving that, I don't know what that looks like in restaurant, how you deal with that. What are your thoughts? You maybe thought about this a little bit more, Dan.
Well, I think it's opportunities. I mean, again, when you start thinking about the chains, they've invested in some of the technology more from cost avoidance, I think, than necessarily to please the patrons. But I do think it's a tremendous opportunity for technology and partnerships that are leveraged. Like if you think about like a Square, for instance, that is really invested in payment processing, but also in terminals. How do they start thinking about bringing that type of capability to the masses, where, every small business that is a restaurant thinks about, they got to think about website. They've got to think about, food delivery where they may not have done it before. They've got to think about online ordering and payments, which are things that they didn't think about. They thought about creating great food and maybe some social awareness and, maybe their Google listing. That's all they really ever thought about before. But the world has changed greatly, where they're going to have to think about other things, not just making great food and having a great venue. Mm-hmm. But your point about the grocery stores, I think, is very spot on. And I think that this is, obviously what Amazon Go stores has all been about, is you walk in, get your stuff and walk out. And there is no interaction with employees, and they know exactly what you purchased. You already have your credit card, synced up to it. And I think that is going to be a trend that you're going to continue to see innovation around grocery stores with things like that, and the rise of, more apps and the ecosystem relative to that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe to build off that, back to public spaces, because to me, 2 or 3 years ago, people were putting pressure on me that we were gonna buy everything online. All my life is tied up in Facebook, and I never really need to leave my house. And I've said for years that we built 5 new coffee shops in the downtown of my city in the last 2 years. So why would you build coffee shops if nobody wants to go out and be social? So to me, from a public space standpoint, as much as people right now are anxious about COVID and the impacts of being out, we are going back to public spaces. It's in our DNA. It's why we live in communities. That's our wiring. And so if I was looking for business opportunities, I might say clearly a disruptive point of time we're in right now. But we will gravitate to some derivative of what we do today, and it's not going to be radically different. It's my opinion. Some social behaviors might be. Are we going to continue to shake hands? I'm having a lot of trouble scrubbing that out of my DNA. the idea of the shaking hands, because it's a true outreach of generosity and kindness. So I don't know how to behave in the workforce if I can't shake someone's hand, but I might have to learn that. But you can bet I'm still taking you for dinner sometime, and I'm not cooking it at my house.
Yeah, for sure. Is there one more question from the team?
Maybe just a comment. First of all, Marty, thank you for your insights and perspectives. We're reading, like Nathan said earlier, we're reading a lot of articles on COVID-19 and its force of innovation, whether folks like it or not. Fresh Direct, which is a e-grocer here in New York City, is a client. It's been a client of mine since the beginning. Is also a vendor. I use them weekly, and one of the things I've been fascinated with is I know their owners and the principals of the company, and you would think that their model and their supply chain, which is pretty efficient, they built an amazing 200,000 square foot facility in the Bronx, got a tax break on it, and that's a whole other discussion. But the facility, the logistics, and the sorting was just fascinating. Like it looked like Amazon's distribution centers, and how they parsed out the fruit and vegetables as I watched it all being built. And I thought, my goodness, they're getting, they're trying to go to farm to table to plate, whatever you want to call it today, but they just didn't get the growth and their efficiency. They weren't making the money. Now COVID-19 happened, and they've got a spike in orders, and they just can't, from a resource perspective, get the product out for a couple of reasons. One is, people aren't going in, and they're working on, social distancing within the workspace. So, they're parsing out deliveries and such, where I can't get delivery the next day anymore. We have to actually schedule it a week out and make sure that we're getting those right pieces. Now, more people are using e-grocers, and this is where I'm going, is there's a tolerance level that we had prior, which was to say, you know what, I got 3 peppers, one of the peppers is bad. It's not good. And I might, depending on my activities and time value money, call them back and say, listen, I want a credit for one of the peppers. And that is annoying to people pre-COVID-19. Now that they're using, I think our tolerance will go down, and post-COVID-19, there might be a level of that tolerance moving a little bit to say, safety, I don't have to go to the grocery. I totally agree, we're human beings and we want that contact and the interaction with people next to us and talking. But I do feel there will be an uptick in the e-grocer category, deliveries and all that, where COVID-19 would help them. And what I can't figure out with Fresh Direct, God bless them, they're not paying their bills. And the P&G, you can actually see on their grocery list, as they're like the P&G's products aren't there. And P&G is not going to put up with 60, 90-day payments. So we're starting to see more local products come into their menu items, right? And that's interesting too, which is telling me they're still not managing it well. So I guess where I'm going is I think the tolerance level will go down a little bit, which people will accept the e-grocery platform a lot more. I also think we're still going to be apprehensive about contact touching, and going back to what Dan was saying, the technology to make it frictionless, to make it more fluid, and things that we're hearing now, contact or what's the term I heard the other day? Touchlessness. I mean, these words are coming out. The tech is there. The ecosystems are there to make that happen. And this is where front runners' great play is whether it be NFCs to gesture to, all these different things. Even with gesture, I read another article about, when you move your hand left and you're picking things, you're not touching a screen. That's going to come into play without a doubt. But how sign language will come into play in interacting with that screen, where what's that term, Nathan? The camera now becomes the keyboard.
Yeah, the camera killed the keyboard, I think, is what we're gonna really focus on.
So those are things that are very interesting. Whether it's a restaurant and you're sitting in front of a screen, you're getting service, but you're picking things, the list goes on. So I think it'll push the innovation. I think we'll see e-grocery grow a bit, and it will be a great play if they can figure out the supply chain and the efficiencies there. But anyway, I love your perspectives and insights. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great insight, Ken. You always have sort of the real world experience. And Marty, I want to really thank you for your time. I mean, this fact, it does come down to sort of this mixture of technology and bridging the virtual and the real world. Happy to think that people will return into the public spaces again, and that you sort of agree with that, as we've built a business model based on that. But they're going to be doing that a little bit differently, and that will involve technology, and you'll see those sort of meshing more than ever before. So with that, I think I speak on behalf of all our front runners and friends that you delivered as expected. Food is our great commodity. It's what keeps us thriving and moving, and the better part of our days are revolved around it. And just want to thank you from day one of being our obviously great supporter. And I know we learned a thing or two here today.
All right. Thank you, guys. Pleasure cheering for you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much, Marty.
Yeah, thank you, Marty.
Thank you,
care.
Marty.
Thanks,
Okay.
Marty.
See ya. All righty. So Marty.